the man who saw angels everywhere, Elisha and the invisible army. The morning began like any other morning, but by the time the sun rose over the hills of Israel, the city where Elisha was staying had become surrounded by an enemy army. Horses stood across the valleys, chariots covered the roads, and soldiers were positioned around the city. There seemed to be no way out. The enemy had not come by accident. They were searching for Elisha, the prophet who had repeatedly warned the king of Israel whenever the Syrian army planned an attack. Again and again, the king of Syria would prepare an ambush, and again, Israel would escape because Elisha knew what was coming. The Syrian king became furious. He demanded to know who was revealing his plans, and eventually his servants told him, "Elisha the prophet knows even the words you speak inside your bedroom." So the king sent an army to capture one man. When Elisha's servant stepped outside and saw the soldiers surrounding the city, fear immediately took control of him. He looked at the horses, the chariots, and the massive army. Then he ran back to Elisha with a desperate question. "What shall we do?" From his perspective, there was no answer. They were two men surrounded by an army, but Elisha remained strangely calm. He did not begin searching for a hiding place. He did not call for soldiers. He did not panic. Instead, he told his servant, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." The servant must have wondered whether Elisha had lost his mind, because when he looked around, he could only see himself, Elisha, and the enemy. There appeared to be nobody else, but Elisha understood something the servant did not. The visible world was not the whole story. So Elisha prayed, "Lord, I pray that you open his eyes so that he may see." And suddenly the servant's vision changed. The mountains surrounding the city were filled with horses and chariots of fire. An enormous heavenly army stood around Elisha. The enemy had surrounded the city, but God's army had already surrounded the enemy. What looked like a hopeless situation was actually a situation in which Elisha was completely protected. The heavenly army had been there before the servant saw it. Nothing had suddenly appeared because the prayer changed God's plan. The prayer simply allowed the servant to see what had already been there. Then the Syrian soldiers began moving toward the city. Elisha prayed again, this time asking God to strike them with blindness. And suddenly, the soldiers could no longer see clearly. Elisha walked directly toward them and told them they had come to the wrong place. Confused and unable to recognize what was happening, the soldiers followed him. Elisha led the entire enemy army toward Samaria, the capital city of Israel. And when they entered Samaria, Elisha prayed once more, and their eyes were opened. Suddenly they realized where they were. They were standing inside the capital of the nation they had come to attack, surrounded by Israelite soldiers. The king of Israel saw the opportunity and asked Elisha whether he should kill them. But Elisha refused. He told the king not to kill them. Instead, he ordered him to prepare food and water for them. The king obeyed. A great meal was prepared, and the soldiers who had arrived expecting to capture Elisha were suddenly sitting at a table eating food provided by the people they had come to destroy. After they finished eating, they were sent back to their master, and for a time, the Syrian raids against Israel stopped. But the most important part of this story happened before the enemy was defeated. It happened when one frightened servant learned that there was more happening around him than his eyes could see. Fear had shown him the size of the enemy, but faith showed him the greatness of God's protection. The servant saw soldiers, Elisha saw angels. The servant saw a city surrounded. Elisha saw a city protected. The servant saw the impossible. Elisha saw God. And that difference changed everything. Sometimes our greatest struggle is not the size of the problem, but the limits of our vision. We look at what is happening around us and assume that what we can see is all that exists. But Scripture repeatedly reminds us that God can work beyond what human eyes can detect. Elisha did not tell his servant that the army was imaginary. The army was real. The danger was real. The soldiers were real. But they were not the only reality. There was another army standing beyond human sight, and that army belonged to God. The story does not promise that every enemy will disappear immediately. It teaches something deeper. God's presence does not depend on whether we can see Him. He can be working even when circumstances appear completely hopeless. The servant needed his eyes opened, not because God had suddenly arrived, but because God had already been there. And perhaps that is the prayer we sometimes need when fear begins to control us. Lord, open my eyes. Help me see beyond the problem. Help me remember that I am not alone. Help me trust you even when the situation looks impossible, because the enemy may surround you, but that does not mean God has abandoned you. The road may appear blocked, but that does not mean there is no way forward. And the problem may look larger than you, but it will never be larger than God. Elisha stood calmly because he understood what his servant was only beginning to learn. What you can see is not always the complete picture, and sometimes the greatest miracle is not the removal of the danger, but the opening of our eyes to discover that God was already standing beside us.